Hello anatomy friends, this is Dr. Alsop, and in this supplementary dissection video we are going to be talking about some of the structures that will actually be visible associated with the spinal cord and the spinal nerves. So we will start with the spinal cord, and this is a very obviously close-up version of this picture here. I put this picture here because it is pretty clear that you're looking at the large vertebral body. And real quickly, think about the vertebral body in terms of its directionality. Is it located anterior or posterior? It's going to be located more anterior or more ventral. So that helps in terms of being able to determine which horns of the gray matter you are looking at. So that always helps me when I am trying to get my bearings in terms of the gray matter. So this gray matter, which is this kind of butterfly-shaped region in the inner portion of, or the more internal portions of the spinal cord, they're going to be organized into horns. So the ventral or anterior horns are going to be the horns that are closer to the body. And you can see those right here. Another thing that can be helpful in terms of identifying the ventral horns is that they're typically on the larger side. They're going to typically be larger than the dorsal horns. Recall that the ventral horns are going to be only motor, and the dorsal horns will be only sensory. So ventral is going to be motor, dorsal will be sensory. Now, in certain areas, you can see a little bit of a lateral extension right here. And these will be called the lateral horns. Still part of the gray matter right here. Their actual name is really anteromediolateral nucleus, or the IML. But we are going to, you'll very often hear them referred to as lateral horns. And these are going to be most obvious at the T1 through L2 spinal cord levels. And that's because they are associated with the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. And you'll also have these lateral horns associated with levels S2 through S4, and those will be associated with the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. So more to come in terms of the autonomic nervous systems, but while we're looking at the spinal cord, at least we can get an idea of where the lateral horns are. And then surrounding and more external will be the white matter. So this whole region around here would be part of the white matter. All right, moving to the spinal nerve. Much of the lateral vertebrae had to be removed in this image in order for us to really be able to follow the full extent of the spinal nerve. When you are dissecting through a laminectomy procedure, so you're looking in from a posterior view, it's easiest to see the dorsal portions of the spinal nerve, and that makes sense. We're looking at a posterior view, but we can see some of the anterior ventral portions of the spinal nerve in this particular image. So you will have the dorsal rootlets that will coalesce into a dorsal root, and you can see a bit of the ventral root right here, and it will kind of continue on this region. Associated with the dorsal root is this often quite large or comparatively large dorsal root ganglion, and it's here that cell bodies for sensory neurons will be located. So recall, a ganglion, when we're talking about the peripheral nervous system, is going to be a collection of cell bodies. The trunk of a spinal nerve is going to be this relatively small portion right here where the two roots are going to meet. So both the dorsal and the ventral roots will meet to form this trunk of a spinal nerve. And at this point, this is going to be a mixed nerve at this point. So you'll have both those sensory and motor fibers traveling in the trunk of the spinal nerve. And very often times you don't hear this referred to as the trunk of the spinal nerve. You'll just hear this referred to as the spinal nerve, but really this whole complex is part of the spinal nerve. Almost immediately, the trunk will split into the primary rami, which are the first branches of the spinal nerve. So you will have the dorsal primary, put a P here, so dorsal primary ramus and the ventral primary ramus. Again, you can see that dorsal a little bit better in this posterior view. And you can see with this dorsal primary ramus that it's going to start splitting fairly quickly. So that dorsal primary ramus as well as the ventral primary ramus will almost always have numerous branches. Many of those branches will be named branches that we'll discuss throughout the course. Okay, we're looking again at the laminectomy that has been completed. The dura mater has been removed in this image, and we are looking at the entirety of the spinal cord, all the way down to even the end of the spinal cord here, which we'll talk about in a moment. There are going to be what's referred to as enlargements associated with the spinal cord, and these happen in regions where there are an increased number of lower motor neurons, and this will be associated with what's going to innervate the appendages. So you'll have a cervical enlargement, which you can see really nicely right here. That's associated with C4 through T1, and this is going to play a role in terms of innervating the upper limb. But the one that you have to identify for today's session will be the lumbosacral, which is going to be in this region. It will be associated with the T1, through, T11 through S1 portions, give or take, and this will be associated with innervating the lower limb. So you can see that it's just basically that spinal nerve just gets a little bit wider in these regions. And then it kind of gets back to its normal size with the kind of middle thoracic region. All right, let's talk about the end of the spinal cord. So you can see here a lot of that vasculature associated with the spinal cord, but you can kind of pick up where the spinal cord is located right here. And then you can see eventually it kind of lowering and tapering till eventually it ends. And this area, this end of the spinal cord, the inferior end of the spinal cord, is the conus medullaris. So this region right here would be the conus medullaris. It's typically between T12 through L3, but usually you'll hear us say it is at L2. So that tip of the conus medullaris, or the very end of that spinal cord, will be around L2. And extending from the spinal cord and then traveling or descending to its targets to eventually exit will be what's referred to as the cauda equina. So it's this whole, all of this right in this region on both sides. And the cauda equina is named because it supposedly resembles the horse's tail. And the cauda equina is the roots of the spinal nerves for the lumbar and sacral regions. So very different appearance to these roots than, say, what we saw in those more superior portions in that previous image. All right, excellent. That was a lot of spinal nerve and spinal cord fun. As you review this, and if you're having some questions about identification or an anatomical relationship associated with these structures, always feel free to reach out to me or any of my colleagues. I'm hoping you are having a good time working through this material, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.